Thank you to Nikon Rumors for always being awesome. I saw today that several Japanese retailers have listed the Nikon D6 as discontinued. And while this doesn't mean that DSLR is dead all of a sudden, as at the making of this video, the D850 and D780 are not officially discontinued, and certainly we will continue to see new Nikon D6 cameras being sold for several years to come. It does, however, mark the end of an era for Nikon, at least as far as Nikon the company is concerned. It looks like DSLR flagships are done. Behind the scenes, I've been quietly anticipating this, kind of knowing what was going to happen, but still patiently waiting because sentimentally and historically, it is a big moment. The Nikon D6 was launched in June of 2020, and the digital flagships have been on a 4-ish cycle since all the way back to Nikon's first DSLR camera, the D1, in 1999. 4-ish years later, the D2 era, 4 years, D3 in 07, a true game changer as it was Nikon's first full-frame DSLR. 5 years later, the D4, 4 years later, D5, 4 years later, in 2020, the D6. The D6, I'm going through puberty. So here we are, about on schedule for something to happen, and Nikon made that something the killing of the D6, with only the Z9 as the replacement for a flagship. We probably all knew it was happening, and I don't want to take your time and just be sad at the end of this flagship DSLR era, but rather I want to celebrate kind of where we've been with the time that we've had with DSLR flagships. Since the Nikon D3 was Nikon's first full-frame digital SLR, and it set the standard for what a flagship would be in the future, we will begin our remembrance there. Again, Nikon's first full-frame digital SLR was announced in April of 2008 for $5,000. It sported a 12-megapixel sensor, originally manufactured by Matsushita, that's Panasonic. And interestingly, I found that the D3 was the first camera to use an EXPEED image processor, which is the Nikon image processor name still in use today. EXPEED 7, as I make this video to be exact. Actually, fun fact, EXPEED 2 was the name given to the D3S image processor, which we will check out that camera in a bit. The D3 image processor was the EL142. They are incredibly similar to the EXPEED 2, having some tweaks, but they are similar enough that I think people get confused a little bit, including me. Anyway, the D3 had a 3-inch fixed screen with a screen resolution of 922,000 dots. Aren't we spoiled today? It would shoot 11 frames per second, and the mechanical shutter would give us 30 seconds to 1/8,000th of a second with a native ISO range of 200 to 6400, expendable to 100 to 25,600. It had most of the focus modes you'd expect of the time, so no touch focus or face detection, and it utilized 51 focus points, 15 of which were cross-type. So what about video features? There were none. Absolutely zero. That didn't come until the incremental upgrade of the D3 to the Nikon D3S in 2010. But we can't cover that until we cover a previous model. The D3X launched in 2009 for $8,000. Ouch. It's kind of hard to call it an incremental upgrade because it really is just a different camera altogether and a completely different price bracket, and it's actually labeled as a replacement for the D2X. But nonetheless, this is the D3 era, so it sported a 25-megapixel sensor manufactured by Sony with 5 frames per second continuous shooting and a native ISO range of 100 to 1600, that's like nothing, expendable to 50 to 6400 ISO. Other than that, pretty similar besides having 2000 dots less on the rear screen resolution. Now for the real incremental update, the Nikon D3S. This was the camera I aspired to when I first started photography. It was the big kid on the block whenever I was learning, and I remember all of the earliest YouTube photography channels sporting this camera while I learned on my first camera, the Nikon D3200, which, by the way, is still in the family. It launched in 2009 for $5,200 and was basically the same thing as the D3, but we actually got some improvements, and actually some small sacrifices with the D3S. Nikon added HD 720 video, and the D3S was actually slightly lighter weighing at 1,240 grams instead of 1,300, which is like almost nothing. But anyway, we also got an increase in native ISO to 12,800, expandable to 100 to 102,400. But for whatever reason, we ended up with 1,000 dots less resolution on the rear screen. Not that you'd probably ever notice that, I certainly wouldn't. And the most minuscule difference in dynamic range, and 100 less shots of battery life on the D3S. Fun fact about the Nikon D3S though, Nikon actually manufactured this image sensor in-house. Today, you can pick up a D3 and a D3S for around $400 and a D3X in the $700 range. Check the links in the description first. I get a 2% commission if you find one over there. A final fun fact of the D3 era, the D3 and D3X both had a shutter life rated at 300,000 actuations, but the updated D3S actually went down to 200 to 250,000. Lame. What'd you find over there? What'd you find? You're just a little tiny baby. The D4 was announced in 2012 for $6,000. Nikon increased the resolution of this in-house manufactured sensor to 16 megapixels, but kept 11 frames per second, and the same shutter speed of 30 seconds to 1/8,000th. It wasn't the first camera to have the EXPEED 3, that was actually first used in the Nikon 1 series, but we finally got it in a flagship, and in case you're curious, all of the EXPEED processors that I can find, including the EXPEED 3, have been manufactured by Socionext Inc. The resolution of the rear screen stayed at 921,000 dots, but increased to 3.2 inches, the size we still see today. We finally see a native ISO minimum of 100, maxing out natively at 12,800, expandable to 50 to 204,800. Still no touch focus at this time, but you got 51 focus points, 15 of which were cross-type, and we finally see 1080p video in a flagship. Nice. We didn't get an X model in the D4 era, but in 2014, on schedule, we saw the D4S announced on February 24th. Nikon manufactured this image sensor as well and introduced some cool new things that would have been very tempting to D4 owners. Such things like ISO 100 to 25,600, expandable to 50 to 409,600, and it had face detection. Very cool, and probably why people love the tracking so much in this camera, but still no touch focus. For the D4S processor, we saw the EXPEED 4 come into the flagships, although it was not the first camera with it. The EXPEED 4 was first used in the Nikon D5300. Interesting that Nikon seems to be testing out the processors on less expensive cameras before committing to a flagship, a practice that I can get behind. Gotta make sure it's good enough when you charge $6,500 for the D4S, a price that will become familiar in coming flagships. Today, however, you can get a D4 in pretty rough shape for about $400 and in good shape in the $800 range. And a D4S is kind of in the same territory, maybe right at $900 in excellent shape. If you're shopping, you should know that the shutter life expectancy on both the D4 and D4S was improved over their predecessors, both of which are rated at 400,000 before maintenance or replacement might be needed. The Nikon D5 image sensor has kind of a fun side note. You'll find that it was manufactured by Toshiba, but Sony owns Toshiba, so why do you keep finding Toshiba whenever you Google search this? I'm going to make an educated guess. The Nikon D5 was announced on January 5th, 2016. The agreement for Sony to acquire Toshiba was signed on December 4th of 2015, 1 month and a day prior to the D5 announcement. Since the D5 started shipping in March of 2016, there are most certainly sensors already in production at the time of the acquisition. So that is why I guess you probably will find that Toshiba manufactured them, because they had Nikon's designs and all this D5 stuff was already going before Sony bought them. Nice business move, Sony. Anyway, for $6,500, the D5 introduced some very nice improvements, being driven by the EXPEED 5. Again, D5 wasn't the first to get it. It was actually the Nikon 1 series J5. 21 megapixels had finally landed on Nikon flagships with a native ISO range of 100 to 102,400, expandable to 3,280,000. The camera would shoot 14 frames per second with the usual 30 seconds to 1/8,000th mechanical shutter, and you could review these amazing images on the same fixed 3.2-inch screen that was now 2.359 million dots of resolution. Nice. We're kind of getting into that modern resolutions now. We also finally see 4K video on a flagship. It was 30 FPS, but it was still 4K. It would do 1080 at 60 though. The focus system gave us 153 focus points, 99 of which were cross-type, but still no touch to focus. I should say at this point that touch to focus means nothing to me. I can't stand it. In fact, I turn off that function altogether in my mirrorless cameras because I always bump it and it does things. Anyway, today you can find a Nikon D5 in excellent condition in the $1,900 range and some refurbished or like new models upwards of $3,400. If you're in the market now, check the shutter count to make sure it's under the D5 shutter life expectancy of 400,000 actuations. Now, we didn't actually get an incremental update to the D5, but we did get some controversy because many people believed that the Nikon D6, the now retired from production reason for this video, looked more like a D5S, or at least what people wanted a D5S to look like, rather than a flagship worthy of a brand new number, the number 6. The Nikon D6 was announced in February of 2020 for $6,496.95, which at the moment of this scripting is still the retail price, so no surprise that refurbished models are $5,800 and used excellent copies run in the $4,000 range. It received the new and improved and modern EXPEED 6, which officially merged the production worlds of mirrorless and DSLR, as the first cameras to have the EXPEED 6 image processor were the Nikon Z6 and Z7. Even then, Nikon knew to try the processor out somewhere else, like the first-gen mirrorless, before sticking it in a flagship. It does indeed share a lot of things in common with the D5. 21 megapixels, 100 to 102,400 native ISO, expandable to 50 on the lower end, which is new, but the same 3,280,000 on the top end. The D6 is lighter by 250-ish grams, and minimum focus sensitivity is negative 0.5 EV better than the D5, and we see focus bracketing, but mostly the D6 just had better connectivity, which are things people wanted in the D5S that never came. They even both have the same 14 FPS and nearly 2.4 million dot fixed 3.2-inch LCD screen. The shutter life is still 400,000, the same two storage slots, both have illuminated buttons and anti-flicker shooting. Now, the focus points are different. We learned that the D5 has 153 focus points with 99 cross-type. The D6, however, has less at 105 focus points, but all of them are cross-type, and they also give us eye priority focus. The D6 is indeed considered a better focusing system by most so far as I could find, but regardless, they are really similar, and I don't really care because I was never in the market for either of them, but I do remember the fury of YouTubers whenever they were suggesting that it just wasn't enough, and I might be inclined to agree a little bit, sight unseen on both cameras. Personally, I think it would have been really cool to have something really incredible to end the DSLR flagship era on. Something that blended together the benefits of mirrorless with the ironed out efficiency of DSLR to the most extreme that the two worlds could be blended at that time. But we got what we got. The Nikon D6, everyone. Better than the D5? Yes. Better enough? Apparently not, but whatever. We had a really good couple of decades of professional cameras from Nikon. Which one was your favorite? Are you actually in the market for any of them today? Let us know in the comments. The Nikon D6, at the end of the day, it's absolutely undeniable. Fantastic camera. I mean, let's be real, it's the best pro unibody flagship DSLR that Nikon ever made. You may not think that it's enough to be called the D6, and maybe you would rather it be called the D5S, but you can't deny that it's an improvement. And so it's just the best. And that is worthy of our respect and our love. So thank you, Nikon, for giving us many decades of incredible flagship, unibody, sexy, robust, rugged, nearly indestructible cameras for pros to get out there and get in the dirt and the rain and the safari and the sweat and the tears. I'm Z-Wade, the Z-Wade, and Z-Wade Photo. Stay sharp, YouTube.
Oh, she finally lay her head down. You're so sweet.